Hey, tonight we're diving into one of history's most fearsome disease outbreaks, a mysterious and terrifying plague that swept across Europe in 1495. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in Europe in the year 1495, a world teetering on the edge of change and chaos. The air is thick with the sense of wood smoke and humanity, a far cry from the fresh, sanitized world you're used to. The good news is that you're alive in a vibrant time of discovery, art, and exploration. The Renaissance is blooming across Europe, with brilliant minds like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo creating masterpieces that will endure for centuries. The bad news? Well, you've been born right at the beginning of one of history's most terrifying disease outbreaks, a mysterious illness that will soon be spreading terror throughout the continent. You've arrived in Naples, a bustling Italian port city. It's February 1495, and the French army led by King Charles VIII has just captured the city after a long siege. The soldiers are celebrating their victory, drinking wine imported from distant lands, carousing with local women and enjoying their moment of triumph. No one yet knows that something sinister is brewing among them, something that will soon cast a shadow across all of Europe. As you walk through the narrow streets of Naples, you notice the French soldiers everywhere. They're a motley group, not just Frenchmen, but mercenaries from all over Europe, Swiss pikemen, German landsknechts, Spanish swordsmen, and Italian crossbowmen. Charles VIII's army of 50,000 men is like a moving city, and they've brought their camp followers with them, cooks, servants, and prostitutes. The military victory has turned into a weeks-long celebration, with wine flowing freely and morals loosening by the hour. "Watch yourself around those soldiers," whispers a local woman selling bread as you pass by her stall. "They bring nothing but trouble." She spits on the ground for emphasis, then crosses herself. The locals are already growing weary of the occupying force, finding them crude and disrespectful. The soldiers seem healthy enough now, but soon some of them will develop strange sores that don't heal, followed by a rash across their bodies, bone-deep pain, and eventually, for many, disfigurement and death. What's brewing here will soon be called the French disease by the Italians, though other countries will name it after their enemies or neighbours. The Neapolitan disease, the Spanish disease, the Polish disease, depending on who they wish to blame. It's the outbreak of what we now know as syphilis, though that name won't be coined until 1530 by the Italian physician Girolamo Fracastoro. You've arrived at a pivotal moment in medical history. For centuries, scholars will debate whether Columbus and his crew brought this disease back from the Americas in 1493, or whether it had always existed in Europe in some form. The archaeological evidence from skeleton 1216, found at the Hull Friary site in England, suggests the disease may have been in Europe long before Columbus, perhaps as far back as the 1300s. But something has changed. Either a new strain has emerged, or an old disease has mutated into something more virulent and deadly. You decide to find lodging at a modest inn near the harbour, where sailors and merchants gather to exchange news from distant lands. The innkeeper, a stout man with a perpetual sheen of sweat on his forehead, shows you to a small room. It's basic, just a straw mattress on a wooden frame, a small table with a candle, and a chamber pot in the corner, but it's clean enough by medieval standards, which isn't saying much. "Food served below when the bell rings," he tells you. "We've got fresh fish today, brought in this morning. The French officers took most of it, but I saved some for paying guests." He gives you a conspiratorial wink. Later, in the common room downstairs, you find yourself seated near a group of sailors who claim to have sailed with Columbus on his voyages to the New World. They're telling tall tales of their adventures, each story more outlandish than the last. One of them, a weathered man with leathery skin and missing teeth, lowers his voice as he speaks. "There's something not right with some of the men who returned," he confides to the group. "Pedro, who was with us on the first voyage, he's got these sores that won't heal. Started on his private parts, you know?" He makes a crude gesture. Now they're spreading, and the pain in his bones keeps him awake at night, screaming like a demon's got him. The others nod solemnly. Another adds, "I've heard of others like that. They say it's because they lay with the native women there." You listen carefully, realizing you're hearing first-hand accounts of what might be the earliest European cases of this new disease. Whether it truly came from the Americas or was already present in Europe, the connection to Columbus's voyages will become firmly established in the popular imagination. As the weeks pass, you begin to notice changes in the city. There are whispers of a strange affliction spreading among the French troops. Some soldiers have developed painful sores, first on their genitals, then spreading across their bodies. They suffer terrible fevers and aches in their bones, especially at night. The local doctors are baffled. By July 1495, the political situation has changed. An alliance of Italian princes, led by Ludovic Sforza, defeats Charles VIII at the Battle of Fornovo, forcing the French king to retreat. As the French army disperses, its soldiers, many now carrying the mysterious disease, return to their homes all across Europe, unwittingly becoming the vectors of a continent-wide epidemic. You decide to leave Naples and travel north to Rome, hoping to witness the great works of art being created there. The journey is arduous. Medieval travel means walking or riding a horse or donkey along poorly maintained roads, always wary of bandits. You join a merchant caravan for safety, sleeping under the stars or in roadside inns of varying quality. As you travel, you hear more stories of the strange disease that's spreading from Naples. Everywhere, it seems to follow in the wake of returning soldiers. In Rome, you find the city in a state of anxiety. Pope Alexander VI, the controversial Borgia Pope, has issued warnings about the new disease, which is already affecting members of his court. In August 1495, the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian III makes a proclamation that nothing like this disease has been seen before and declares it a punishment from God for blasphemy. The religious authorities are quick to frame the outbreak in moral terms, divine retribution for sinful behaviour, particularly sexual impropriety. You witness the early attempts at public health measures. Towns begin to isolate those showing symptoms, sometimes in dedicated hospices, but medieval medicine has few effective treatments to offer. Physicians trained in the Galenic tradition believe in the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, and treat diseases by trying to restore the body's proper balance through bloodletting, purging, and sweating therapies. For this new disease, various remedies are attempted. Some physicians recommend mercury treatments, applied as ointments or taken internally, unaware that mercury poisoning will often kill patients before the disease does. Others advocate for guaiacum, a resin from a New World tree, also known as holy wood, believing that God provides cures near the source of diseases. The wealthy seek these expensive treatments while the poor suffer without relief. In the markets and public squares, you observe how quickly fear and stigma take hold. Those with visible symptoms are shunned. People whisper that it's a disease of the immoral, the sexually deviant, those who have sinned against God. Yet you notice that it affects people from all walks of life, from the common prostitute to the nobleman, from the soldier to the priest. By winter, you've made your way to Florence, the jewel of the Renaissance. Even here, the shadow of the disease has fallen. You hear that the brilliant young painter Botticelli has become deeply religious, influenced by the fiery preacher Savonarola, who claims the epidemic is God's punishment for Florence's sinful ways. The joyful, sensual beauty of Botticelli's earlier works, like The Birth of Venus, is giving way to more sombre religious themes. In Florence, you manage to find work as an assistant to a physician. Dr. Lorenzo Benevieni is unusual among doctors of his time. He performs autopsies to understand the inner workings of the body and the effects of disease, an approach that puts him at the forefront of the emerging scientific method. Working with him gives you a unique perspective on how medical knowledge is evolving in this period. This new disease, Dr. Benevieni tells you as you help him prepare his instruments, it's unlike anything described in the ancient medical texts. Hippocrates never wrote of it, nor Galen. Either it's truly new to our world, or it's changed its nature. He sighs heavily. And our treatments seem to offer little relief. The mercury causes terrible suffering itself, excessive salivation, loss of teeth, tremors. Sometimes I wonder if we're doing more harm than good. You assist him as he examines patients afflicted with the disease. The progression is terrible to witness. In the early stage, a painless sore appears, usually on the genitals. It heals on its own, giving false hope. Then, weeks later, a rash appears, often covering the entire body, accompanied by fever, fatigue, and aches. For some, the disease seems to disappear after this, going dormant for years. But for many, especially in these early years of the epidemic, it progresses relentlessly to the third stage, with large, disfiguring sores, damage to the heart, brain and bones, and eventually death. The disease seems to have a pattern, Dr. Benevieni observes, 3 stages with periods of apparent recovery between them. It's most deceptive. Through your work with the doctor, you learn about the social dimensions of the epidemic. The wealthy seek treatment in private, paying handsomely for discretion. The poor suffer publicly, often banished to the outskirts of towns. Religious authorities preach moral purity as prevention, while city governments struggle to contain the spread. As spring arrives in 1496, you hear news that the disease has now reached as far as Germany, France, Switzerland, and Holland. It travels along trade routes, following the paths of merchants, soldiers, and sailors. No corner of Europe seems safe from its reach. In the markets of Florence, you overhear conversations about the disease. Everyone has a theory about its origins and nature. It came from the New World, insists a spice merchant. Columbus's men brought it back with them. Nonsense, counters a wool trader. It's a corruption of leprosy, made more virulent by the alignment of the planets. It's the Jews, whispers another, looking around furtively. They brought it when they were expelled from Spain. You recognize how fear breeds superstition and scapegoating. The tendency to blame others, foreigners, enemies, marginalized groups, is as infectious as the disease itself. The year 1497 brings news that the epidemic has reached Britain and Scotland. By now, physicians across Europe are documenting the disease with increasing accuracy. In 1498, Joseph Grinpeck, a German scholar, publishes one of the first detailed descriptions, writing that the disease is so cruel, so distressing, so appalling that until now nothing so horrifying, nothing more terrible or disgusting has ever been known on this earth. Working with Dr. Benevieni has given you insights into how medical knowledge evolves in response to new challenges. The epidemic is forcing physicians to question ancient authorities and trust their own observations. You're witnessing the early stirrings of what will eventually become the scientific revolution. By 1499, the disease has become endemic across Europe. Reports suggest it has reached Scandinavia, Hungary, Greece, Poland, and Russia. European voyagers have carried it as far as Calcutta in India. It seems no place is untouched. During your time in Renaissance Europe, you've observed how differently the disease affects various communities. In port cities like Naples and Venice, where sailors and prostitutes mix freely, the spread is rapid. In isolated rural villages, it might arrive with a returning soldier or merchant, then slowly work its way through families and neighbours. The fear of the disease changes social behaviours. There's greater suspicion of strangers, less hospitality for travellers. Sexual mores tighten, at least publicly. Yet human nature remains constant. People still seek pleasure and connection, even knowing the risks. In the summer of 1500, 5 years after the first major outbreak in Naples, you find yourself in Venice, that magnificent city of canals and commerce. The Republic of Venice, always pragmatic, has instituted some of Europe's most advanced public health measures. The Venetian Senate has appointed health magistrates who inspect ships, impose quarantines, and regulate prostitution in attempts to control the spread of disease. On the Rialto Bridge, watching the gondolas glide beneath, you reflect on what you've witnessed, a continent transformed not just by a disease, but by its response to that disease. You've seen how the epidemic has influenced art, religion, medicine, and social structures. You've observed both the worst of human nature, the fear, blame, and stigmatization, and the best, the courage of healers, the solidarity of communities, the resilience of the human spirit. As night falls over the lagoon, the lamplighters move through the city, bringing points of brightness to the gathering darkness. It strikes you as an apt metaphor for the human response to any calamity, the determination to create light, to find understanding, to forge ahead, even in the most frightening circumstances. And so you settle in for the night in your rented room overlooking a small canal, listening to the gentle lapping of water against stone, pondering what the coming years will bring as Europe continues to grapple with this mysterious and frightening disease, unaware that it will remain a scourge for centuries to come, shaping history in ways both subtle and profound. The morning light filters through the shutters of your Venetian room, dancing on the water reflected on your ceiling. You've spent several months in this merchant republic, observing how one of Europe's most sophisticated cities responds to the epidemic. Venice, you've learned, has centuries of experience dealing with infectious diseases, especially plague. The city established its first permanent health magistracy, the Magistrato alla Sanità, back in 1486, just a decade before this new disease emerged. The Venetian approach is impressively systematic. Ships arriving at the port must display a clean bill of health or remain isolated at anchor for 40 days. The practice called quarantina, where our word quarantine comes from. The city maintains a lazaretto, an isolation hospital on a separate island, where the infected can be treated away from the general population. It's a harsh but effective system. But even Venice's advanced public health measures can't fully contain the French disease, as many still call it. The city's famous courtesans, high-class prostitutes who are often educated, artistic women moving in elite circles, have been particularly affected both by the disease itself and by the new regulations attempting to control its spread. You've become acquainted with Veronica Franco, a young courtesan who is also a published poet. Unlike common prostitutes who work the street corners or brothels, courtesans like Veronica entertain wealthy merchants and noblemen in elegant apartments, providing intellectual conversation and artistic performances along with physical companionship. The Senate has imposed new restrictions, Veronica tells you as you sip wine on her balcony overlooking the Grand Canal. We must now register with the health office and submit to examinations. Those found with the disease are sent to the lazaretto or expelled from the city. She sighs, setting down her glass. Many of my sisters in the profession have disappeared, dead, isolated, or fled to other cities with less supervision. Veronica is fortunate to count several powerful senators among her patrons, protecting her from the worst of these measures, but she knows her position is precarious. The disease has changed everything, she says. Even when we appear healthy, we're viewed with greater suspicion. Some courtesans now provide only conversation and entertainment, refusing physical intimacy entirely. The social fabric of Venice is changing in response to the epidemic, as it is throughout Europe. Public bathhouses, once popular social venues, are closing as they become associated with disease transmission. Kissing as a form of greeting, previously common among equal status men in many European regions, is falling out of favour. Even the shared communion cup in church is increasingly viewed with suspicion. Your time in Venice has shown you how a relatively well-organised society responds to epidemic disease. But you're curious about conditions elsewhere, so as autumn approaches, you decide to journey northward, crossing the Alps into the German territories of the Holy Roman Empire. The journey is arduous. You join a merchant caravan travelling to the great trading city of Augsburg, crossing mountain passes while the weather still permits. The Alpine crossing is breathtaking. Towering peaks, verdant valleys, clear mountain streams, but also dangerous. The narrow paths cling to mountainsides, sometimes barely wide enough for the pack horses. At night, you sleep in rustic mountain hostels or under the stars when no shelter is available. Your fellow travellers are a diverse group. Italian merchants carrying silks and spices to northern markets, German craftsmen returning home after studying in Italian workshops, pilgrims returning from Rome, and a handful of students travelling between universities. Around the campfire each night, conversation inevitably turns to the epidemic sweeping Europe. In Milan, they're saying it's a punishment for the French invasion, says a silk merchant from Florence, God's judgment on Charles and his armies. Then why are the rest of us suffering, counters a German silversmith. In Nuremberg, even children are showing signs of the disease. What sin could they have committed? A student from the University of Padua who has been studying medicine offers a different perspective. My professors say it's a corruption of the humours caused by an unfavourable alignment of the planets, particularly Saturn. They're debating whether it's a new disease entirely or a more virulent form of leprosy or elephantiasis. You listen to these theories, reflecting on how humans struggle to make sense of calamity, grasping for explanations that fit their understanding of the world. The religious see divine punishment, the educated look to classical medical theories and astrology, the xenophobic blame foreigners or marginalised groups. Few have the tools or perspective to understand the true nature of infectious disease. After nearly 2 weeks of travel, your caravan descends from the mountains into the rolling countryside of southern Germany. The landscape is a patchwork of forests, fields, and small villages clustered around the spires of parish churches. Autumn has painted the forests in brilliant oranges and golds, a stark contrast to the more subtle palette of the Italian landscape you've left behind. You reach Augsburg as the first snow flurries announce winter's approach. This wealthy imperial free city is a centre of banking and commerce, home to powerful merchant families like the Fuggers and Welsers who finance kings and emperors. Its wide streets and substantial stone buildings speak of prosperity and order, but even here the shadow of the epidemic looms. Outside the city gates you pass a newly established hospice for those suffering from the French disease. The afflicted sit or lie in the weak autumn sunshine, their faces and bodies marked by the characteristic sores. Some call out for alms as you pass. Within the city, you find lodging at an inn catering to merchants and travellers. The innkeeper, Herr Müller, is a voluble man eager to share the local news and gossip. As he shows you to your room, considerably more comfortable than most of your recent accommodations, with a feather bed and small hearth, he explains the city's response to the epidemic. The city council has banned those with the disease from public bathhouses and barbershops, he tells you. The Guild of Surgeons has been tasked with examining suspected cases. Those found infected must wear a special marking on their clothes and stay out of taverns and markets. Herr Müller lowers his voice conspiratorially. Even Jakob Fugger's nephew was sent away to their country estate when he showed signs of the disease. Money can't protect you from God's judgment. Jakob Fugger, known as the Rich, is perhaps the wealthiest man in Europe. A banker and merchant whose financial empire stretches across the continent. That even his family has been touched by the epidemic underscores its indiscriminate nature. During your stay in Augsburg, you learn more about how the epidemic is affecting different segments of society. The city maintains hospital facilities run by religious orders like the Antonines, who have long specialised in treating skin diseases, but their traditional remedies, prayers, herbal baths, dietary regimens based on the theory of humours, provide little relief for this new affliction. For the wealthy, physicians prescribe mercury treatments, administered as ointments, pills, or through fumigation therapy, where the patient is exposed to mercury vapour. These treatments cause profuse salivation, which is seen as the body expelling the disease. What the doctors don't realise is that these symptoms, along with the tremors, gum disease, and neurological problems many patients develop, are actually signs of mercury poisoning. The cure is often worse than the disease, comments Dr. Adalbert Heim, a city physician you meet through the innkeeper's connections. I've seen patients lose their teeth, their hair, their minds from these mercury treatments, yet we have little else to offer except palliative care. Dr. Heim is unusual among his colleagues for his skepticism about traditional treatments. Most physicians still adhere strictly to Galenic medicine, which has changed little since ancient times. They believe illness results from imbalance in the four bodily humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, and treat accordingly with bloodletting, purging, and substances classified as hot, cold, wet, or dry to counteract the perceived imbalance. The ancients never described this disease, Dr. Heim tells you as he shows you his modest medical library. That's what makes it so confounding. We have no guidance from Hippocrates or Galen. We must observe and learn for ourselves. This empirical approach, learning through observation rather than relying solely on ancient authorities, represents the leading edge of medical thinking in this period. It will eventually blossom into the scientific revolution, but for now it remains the minority view. As winter deepens, you witness how the rhythm of life in northern Europe adapts to the harsh season. The days grow short, with darkness falling by mid-afternoon. Streets empty as people retreat indoors. Families gather around hearths, burning precious fuel to keep warm. The fortunate have stores of food to last until spring: salted meat, dried fish, root vegetables, and preserved fruits. The poor subsist on dark bread and whatever they can afford at the increasingly expensive winter markets. Despite the cold, life continues. The Christmas season brings processions and mystery plays depicting biblical stories. Guilds compete to present the most impressive pageants. For a time, the festivities provide a welcome distraction from the epidemic's shadow. But as January's deep freeze grips the city, you notice how the disease seems to recede somewhat. Fewer new cases appear, and some victims experience temporary improvement. Dr. Heim has an interesting theory about this. It seems the disease, like many fevers, waxes and wanes with the seasons, he explains. Perhaps the cold inhibits its spread or strength, or perhaps when people gather less often in public, there are fewer opportunities for contagion. His insight is remarkable for the time, an early understanding of what we now know as disease seasonality and the role of social contact in transmission. But without a framework for understanding germs or infection, such observations remain isolated insights rather than building blocks of a comprehensive theory. During your winter in Augsburg, you become acquainted with different social classes and their experiences of the epidemic. The patrician families, like the Fuggers, live in large stone houses with private wells and privy chambers, allowing them to maintain better hygiene than commoners. When illness strikes, they can retreat to country estates away from urban contagion. They have access to physicians and expensive treatments, however ineffective these might be. Guildmasters, the skilled craftsmen who form the backbone of the city's economy, live more modestly but still enjoy considerable comforts. Their workshops and homes are often combined in the same building, with family members and apprentices living and working together. This proximity means that when one falls ill, others often follow. Journeymen and labourers inhabit rented rooms or simple dwellings in less desirable parts of the city. They rely on public wells for water and public bathhouses for bathing, both potential vectors for disease. When sick, they might receive charity care from religious institutions, but often must continue working as long as physically possible, having no other means of support. The poorest, beggars, day labourers, and the growing population of displaced rural people seeking opportunity in cities suffer most acutely. Living in overcrowded conditions with poor nutrition and sanitation, they are especially vulnerable to all diseases, including the new epidemic. By spring of 1501, you've spent nearly a year in Augsburg, observing its response to the continuing epidemic. The initial panic has subsided into a grim acceptance as the disease becomes endemic rather than epidemic, a persistent feature of life rather than a novel crisis. People adapt, developing social customs and public health measures to minimize risk while continuing necessary activities. As the snow melts and travel becomes easier, you decide to journey onward to the university town of Heidelberg, where scholars are documenting the disease with increasing precision. You join a merchant convoy travelling along the river routes through the heart of German-speaking lands. The countryside you pass through bears the marks of both prosperity and hardship. Well-tended fields surround substantial villages, but you also see abandoned farmsteads and uncultivated land. The previous decades have brought increasing social tensions, peasant revolts, religious dissent, economic pressures from changing trade patterns. The epidemic is but one of many challenges facing the common people of Europe. In the villages where your convoy stops for the night, you observe how rural communities are affected by the disease. The spread is slower than in crowded cities, but when it arrives, it often moves through family groups. You hear stories of entire households afflicted, with no one well enough to tend crops or animals. The rural understanding of the disease differs somewhat from urban perspectives. Village healers, often women with knowledge of traditional herbal remedies, offer treatments based on local plants, guaiacum wood when available, but more often native herbs like sassafras, sarsaparilla, and burdock, believed to purify the blood. Some of these may actually have mild anti-inflammatory or immune-supporting properties, providing modest relief even as their theoretical basis remains misunderstood. Religious responses are particularly strong in rural areas. Processions, special masses, and pilgrimages to local shrines seek divine intervention against the epidemic. Some villages revive older pre-Christian practices alongside Christian observances, hanging protective herbs over doorways, burying symbolic objects at field boundaries, observing specific taboos believed to ward off illness. As your journey continues, you pass through increasingly prosperous lands along the Rhine River. Vineyards climb the hillsides, producing the famous Rhine wines exported throughout Europe. Castles perch on strategic heights, home to the minor nobility who control local territories. River traffic is constant, barges laden with goods moving between major trading centres. At one riverside inn, you meet a group of students returning to Heidelberg after the winter break. They're eager to share the latest medical discussions from the university, where physicians are carefully documenting the progression and symptoms of the disease. Professor Theodoricus has identified distinct stages, explains a serious young man named Heinrich. The primary stage with a single sore, usually on the private parts, the secondary with widespread rash and fever, and now he's describing a tertiary stage that may appear years later, with gumata, large rubbery swellings, and afflictions of the brain and heart. Another student adds, they're debating whether it's truly new or if it's related to other diseases. Some say it's a more virulent form of leprosy, others that it's an entirely novel contagion brought from the islands Columbus discovered. The students are full of theoretical knowledge but have little practical experience treating the afflicted. Still, their systematic approach to understanding the disease represents an important shift in medical thinking, a move toward careful observation and classification that will eventually lead to more effective treatments. You reach Heidelberg as spring blooms across the Neckar Valley. The town is dominated by its university and the castle of the Electors Palatine who rule this territory. Situated at the junction of major trade routes, it's a place where ideas and goods flow freely, making it both intellectually vibrant and vulnerable to the spread of disease. The university attracts scholars from across Europe, creating a community more cosmopolitan than the surrounding region. In its lecture halls and disputations, the latest theories about the epidemic are debated with intensity, but for all their learning, the professors have few effective treatments to offer those suffering in the town below their ivory tower. In Heidelberg, you find lodging with a printer named Johannes Meyer, who produces medical texts, among other works. His workshop gives you access to the latest written knowledge about the disease, treatises and broadsides from physicians across Europe, often illustrated with woodcuts showing the characteristic symptoms. These sell quickly, Herr Meyer tells you, showing a pamphlet titled On the French Disease and Its Remedies by a Spanish physician. Everyone seeks information, hoping to protect themselves or find relief for afflicted family members. The printer introduces you to Dr. Alexander Seitz, a physician who has written extensively on the epidemic. Dr. Seitz has developed a theory that the disease passed from animals to humans through improper sexual contact, a misguided but interesting attempt to explain its origins. The moral degradation of our time has invited this scourge, Dr. Seitz tells you solemnly. God permits such evils when men stray from natural law. His explanation blends emerging medical observation with traditional moral and religious frameworks, typical of this transitional period in scientific thought. Through your discussions with scholars and physicians in Heidelberg, you gain a clearer picture of how medical understanding is evolving in response to the epidemic. The traditional Galenic system, based on the four humours, is being stretched to accommodate a disease that doesn't fit neatly into its categories. Some practitioners are beginning to question aspects of the ancient wisdom, while still working largely within its framework. By summer 1501, reports from across Europe indicate that the epidemic continues unabated, though perhaps with decreasing virulence. The disease remains widespread, but fewer victims seem to progress to the most severe stages within a short time frame. Whether this represents a change in the disease itself or increased immunity in the population remains unclear to contemporary observers. As you reflect on your journey through epidemic-stricken Europe, you recognise how profoundly this disease is shaping society. Beyond the obvious physical suffering, it has transformed social norms, influenced art and literature, challenged medical traditions, reinforced religious interpretations of illness, and altered intimate behaviours. Like the Black Death before it, this epidemic will leave an indelible mark on European culture and consciousness. On a warm evening, you sit in the garden of a Heidelberg tavern with a group of students and scholars discussing the future. Despite the continuing presence of the disease, there's a cautious optimism among these educated young men. They speak of new discoveries, new lands, new ideas breaking free from the constraints of medieval thought. "We live in an age of wonders and terrors," says a young scholar of astronomy. "Columbus finds new worlds across the ocean. The Turks press against our eastern borders. Strange diseases emerge, old certainties crumble, yet knowledge grows. Perhaps our children will understand what we can only question." His words capture the paradox of this pivotal moment in history, a time of both unprecedented crisis and remarkable advancement. As darkness falls and lanterns are lit around the garden, you ponder what coming years will bring as Europe continues to grapple with this mysterious disease that has so quickly become embedded in its medical, social and cultural landscape. Your time in Heidelberg has been enlightening, but as autumn approaches in 1501, you feel drawn to continue your journey. France calls to you, the kingdom whose soldiers first brought widespread attention to the disease that now bears their name in much of Europe. What might you discover in the land where it all began, at least in the European consciousness? You join a wine merchant travelling to Strasbourg and then down the Rhine toward Paris. The merchant Henri Beaufort has been making this journey twice, yearly for decades, carrying German wines to French markets and returning with French luxuries for German customers. He's a walking chronicle of changing times. "When I began as a young man, the roads were more dangerous, but the people healthier," he tells you as your barge glides down the Rhine. "Now we have better order, fewer robber knights preying on merchants, but this new sickness makes everyone fearful of strangers." Henri explains how the disease has affected his trade. Customers no longer drink from the same cups during wine tastings. Innkeepers provide separate sleeping arrangements where once travellers shared beds freely. In some towns, merchants from affected regions must remain outside the walls for a period before entering. He shrugs philosophically. "We adapt. Life continues. Trade must flow." The journey to Paris takes nearly 3 weeks, following rivers where possible and roads where necessary. Along the way, Henri points out changes in architecture, dress and customs as you cross from German to French territories. Language shifts gradually, with local dialects often more different from each other than the official tongues of distant courts. You pass through villages devastated by the 100 Years' War, only recently ended. Some are still rebuilding after decades of conflict between England and France. Others remain abandoned, reclaimed by forest and field. The common people have endured much in recent generations. War, famine, plague, and now this new disease. Their resilience is remarkable. In smaller settlements, you observe how rural communities cope with the epidemic. Without access to physicians or apothecaries, they rely on traditional healers, often wise women with knowledge of herbal remedies passed down through generations. These healers use local plants like burdock, dandelion and nettles to make infusions and poultices. They can't cure the disease, but sometimes provide temporary relief from symptoms. "My grandmother taught me to treat the sores with a paste made from comfrey root," one village healer tells you when you express interest in her methods. "It soothes the pain and helps them dry. For the fevers, we use willow bark tea. For the aches in the bones, a hot compress of mustard seed." Her pragmatic approach focuses on symptom relief rather than theoretical causes. Religious practices offer another response to the epidemic. In one village, you witness a procession honouring St. Roch, patron saint of plague and infectious disease. Villagers carry candles and relics through the streets, stopping at homes where the sick lie suffering. Priests offer blessings and last rites. Despite the limited physical benefit, these rituals provide psychological comfort and maintain community solidarity in the face of suffering. As you approach Paris, the countryside grows more densely populated and prosperous. Fields are well tended, villages larger and more frequent. The royal road is busy with travellers, merchants, pilgrims, nobles with their entourages, royal messengers on urgent business. At night, you stay in progressively better inns, catering to this steady traffic. Paris announces itself from afar, a haze of smoke hanging over clustered spires and towers. Unlike Italian cities with their defensive walls, Paris has outgrown its fortifications, sprawling beyond the old boundaries into surrounding fields. It's one of Europe's largest cities, home to perhaps 100,000 souls crowded into narrow streets and multi-storey buildings. You part ways with Henri, who is headed to the wine merchants' quarter, and find lodging near the University of Paris. The Latin Quarter, as it's known, buzzes with students and scholars speaking the international language of learning. Booksellers, copyists and stationers cluster around the university, supplying the tools of intellectual trade. Taverns overflow with young men arguing philosophy, theology and increasingly medicine. The University of Paris has long been one of Europe's great centres of medical learning. Its faculty physicians, trained in Galenic tradition, are among the most respected in Christendom, yet they, like their counterparts across Europe, have been humbled by this new disease that defies their classical understanding. You make the acquaintance of a medical student named Jean-Claude, who offers to show you the Hôtel Dieu, Paris's ancient hospital near Notre Dame Cathedral. Founded centuries ago by the church, it provides care for the poor and indigent, relying on the labour of nuns and the charity of the wealthy. The Hôtel Dieu is a sobering sight. Long wards house dozens of patients, often with 2 or 3 to a bed. The air is thick with the smells of sickness, unwashed bodies and herbal remedies. Nuns move efficiently between beds, offering food, drink and basic care. Physicians make rounds once daily, examining patients briefly and prescribing treatments based on humoral theory, bloodletting for those deemed too hot and wet, warming substances for those too cold and dry. They've set aside a separate ward for those with the French disease, Jean-Claude tells you, pointing to a doorway from which a nun emerges carrying soiled linens. Too many cases to ignore, though the masters still debate whether it's truly new or just a virulent form of leprosy. Later, over wine in a student tavern, Jean-Claude explains the current medical thinking at the university. The faculty is divided. The traditionalists insist Galen's system can explain all diseases. They see the French disease as a corruption of the humours caused by an unfavourable celestial alignment and perhaps bad air. But some younger physicians argue it's something entirely new, requiring new approaches. He lowers his voice. There's growing interest in the methods used by barber surgeons and empirics. Mercury treatments, guaiacum decoctions, even cauterization of the initial sores. Methods the learned physicians once dismissed as crude are now being studied, if quietly. This tension between traditional medical authority and practical innovation reflects broader currents in European thought. The Renaissance revival of classical learning paradoxically created both reverence for ancient knowledge and tools to challenge it. As you've witnessed throughout your journey, this epidemic is accelerating that process, forcing practical innovation even while theoretical frameworks lag behind. During your stay in Paris, you explore the city's response to the epidemic at various social levels. The royal court under Louis XV has been touched by the disease. Rumours suggest several courtiers have been quietly sent to country estates to recover or die out of public view. The king's physicians recommend preventative measures, moderate living, avoidance of excessive food and drink, limited sexual contact, and regular bathing in herb-infused water. The nobility and wealthy merchants can afford private care and the most expensive treatments. An apothecary near the fashionable Marais district shows you his stock of exotic remedies, guaiacum wood imported at great expense from the New World, mercury preparations, herbal compounds, with ingredients from as far as China and India. These cost more than a labourer might earn in months, accessible only to the privileged few. For the great lords we prepare special remedies they can take discreetly, the apothecary confides, pills containing gold leaf and pearl powder said to purify noble blood. Do they work? Who can say, but they satisfy those who believe their blood is different from common folk. The middle classes, guildmasters, prosperous merchants, university graduates seek treatment from licensed physicians and reputable apothecaries. They can afford mercury treatments and some imported remedies, though often in less elaborate formulations than the nobility receive. They follow physician recommendations about diet, bathing and lifestyle, having both the knowledge and means to modify their behaviours. The working poor rely on barber surgeons who are more affordable than physicians. These practitioners have limited formal education but substantial practical experience. They lance sores, apply topical remedies, perform bloodletting and administer mercury treatments in less refined forms. Their approach is hands-on and results-oriented, with little concern for theoretical explanations. For the destitute, only charity offers hope of treatment. Religious orders and wealthy benefactors support institutions like the Hôtel Dieu. Some parishes maintain small hospices for their sick poor. The care is basic: clean bedding, regular meals, prayer, and simple treatments, but represents the only option for many victims. What strikes you most is how the epidemic crosses social boundaries while responses to it reinforce them. The disease affects all classes, but experience of it remains profoundly unequal. The wealthy suffer privately with the best available care, the poor suffer publicly with minimal assistance. After several weeks in Paris, you decide to venture into the countryside of northern France. Reports suggest the disease is particularly widespread in Normandy, where many soldiers from the Naples campaign originated. You hire a horse and join a party of cloth merchants travelling to Rouen, once a stronghold of English occupation during the Long War, now returning to prosperity under French rule. The journey takes you through rolling farmland punctuated by woodlands and small villages. The autumn harvest is underway, with peasants working communally to bring in crops before winter. Despite the epidemic's shadow, the rhythm of agricultural life continues much as it has for centuries. The demands of survival leave little room for disruption, even from disease. In one village where you stop for the night, you witness how rural families cope when the disease strikes. A farmer named Michel has been suffering for nearly a year. His symptoms began with a single sore that healed on its own, followed by a widespread rash and bone pains that made agricultural labour nearly impossible. My neighbours helped with the planting and will help with the harvest, he tells you, as he sits by his cottage door, too weak to join the work in the fields. Without them, my family would starve. Next year, God willing, I'll do the same for whoever needs aid. Michael's wife has prepared a bath of herbs gathered from the surrounding countryside, comfrey, chamomile, and others you don't recognise. It eases his pain for a time, she explains. The travelling barber gave us a mercury ointment, but it made him worse. His gums bled and his hands shook so badly he couldn't hold a cup. This pattern repeats across the countryside, communal support filling gaps left by inadequate medical care, practical experience leading to rejection of treatments that cause more harm than good. Without formal knowledge, rural communities are developing their own understanding of the disease through painful trial and error. You reach Rouen as the days grow shorter and colder. This prosperous port city on the Seine has been rebuilt since the war's end and now bustles with commerce. English wool arrives to be woven into fine cloth by skilled artisans. Wine and other goods travel downriver to the Atlantic coast. The magnificent cathedral dominates the skyline, its Gothic spire reaching toward heaven. Through connections provided by the cloth merchants, you find lodging with a widow who supplements her income by renting rooms to respectable travellers. Madame Beauchamp is well informed about local affairs and shares the city's experience with the epidemic. When the first cases appeared 6 years ago, there was panic, she tells you as she serves a simple but hearty beef stew. People blamed the returning soldiers, especially those who'd been in Naples. Some were driven from their homes, denied their livelihoods. The bishop had to preach against this cruelty, reminding the congregation that Christ called us to care for the sick, not shun them. Over time, Rouen developed a more organised response. The city council established a special hospice for those with the French disease, supported by taxes and donations. Barber surgeons receive training from physicians on recognising and treating the condition. Public bathhouses are regularly inspected and required to change water between customers. It hasn't stopped the disease, but fewer people die in the streets or suffer alone, Madame Beauchamp says with practical compassion. And the fear has lessened. We've learned to live with this affliction as we've lived with others before it. During your stay in Rouen, you observe how the epidemic has influenced artistic expression. In the cathedral, a new stained glass window depicts Job, the biblical figure whose suffering from painful sores has made him a patron saint for those with skin diseases. Local painters incorporate symbolic references to the epidemic in religious works. Angels with flaming swords representing divine punishment, saints offering protection to the afflicted. More secular expressions appear in the popular broadsheets sold by street vendors. These single-page prints combine woodcut illustrations with simple text, accessible to semi-literate audiences. Some offer medical advice of varying quality, others use the disease as a moral lesson, showing debauched youths developing telltale symptoms. A few are purely satirical, mocking physicians and their ineffective treatments. You also notice changes in social customs. People greet each other with slight bows rather than embraces or kisses. Communal drinking vessels have disappeared from taverns, replaced by individual cups. Young couples are chaperoned more strictly, and parents investigate potential marriage partners with increasing thoroughness. The shadow of the disease has made intimacy itself suspect. As winter sets in, you decide to remain in Rouen until spring makes travel easier. You find work with a printer who produces medical texts, using your experiences to help edit a compendium of treatments for the French disease. The position offers insight into how medical knowledge circulates and evolves in response to practical outcomes. The printer, Guillaume Desmoulins, explains the market for such works. Physicians buy them to compare their observations with colleagues across Europe. Barber surgeons and apothecaries seek practical instructions. Even some educated lay people purchase them, hoping to treat family members or themselves without the expense of a physician. Through this work, you track how treatments are evolving. Mercury remains dominant but administered with increasing caution and in more refined forms. Guaiacum from the New World gains popularity, especially after several prominent patients report improvement following treatment. Various herbal decoctions, sarsaparilla, sassafras, China root, are gaining advocates, particularly for relieving pain and secondary symptoms. The most interesting reports come from physicians who combine approaches, Guillaume tells you. Those who use mercury more sparingly, alternating with herbal remedies and careful attention to diet. They claim better results than those who rely on a single method. This emerging empirical approach, learning through systematic trial and observation rather than theoretical deduction, represents an important shift in medical thinking. Though practitioners don't fully understand why certain treatments help or harm, they're beginning to develop more nuanced protocols based on observed outcomes. During the long winter evenings, you join discussions at a local tavern frequented by physicians, apothecaries, and other educated professionals. Their conversations reveal how the epidemic is influencing broader intellectual currents. The ancients described many diseases with remarkable accuracy, argues an older physician trained at Montpellier, yet none matches this French disease precisely. Either it's truly new, which challenges the notion that all important knowledge was known to the ancients, or they knew it by another name, which means we've misunderstood their texts. Either possibility disrupts the Renaissance reverence for classical authority. If new diseases can emerge, what other new phenomena might exist beyond ancient knowledge? If ancient texts have been misinterpreted, how reliable is inherited wisdom on other subjects? As winter gradually yields to spring in 1502, you reflect on all you've witnessed during your journey through epidemic-stricken Europe. You've seen how a single disease can transform societies, challenging established medical paradigms, reshaping social interactions, influencing artistic expression, and reinforcing or occasionally bridging social divisions. Most profoundly, you've observed humanity's remarkable adaptability, from Venice's sophisticated public health measures to rural villages' communal support systems, from physicians evolving treatments to individuals changing intimate behaviours. People have responded to the epidemic with creativity and resilience, even amid suffering and fear. As the days lengthen and travel becomes possible again, you consider where your journey might take you next. After witnessing the epidemic's impact in Italy, Germany, and France, perhaps England beckons, or the Iberian Peninsula where Columbus launched his momentous voyages. Or you might return to Italy to observe how the situation has evolved since your departure nearly 2 years ago. Wherever you go, you carry with you a deeper understanding of how disease shapes history, not just through death and suffering, but through humanity's diverse and persistent responses to that suffering. The French disease, like the Black Death before it, will leave Europe transformed in ways both obvious and subtle, immediate and enduring. With spring warming the Norman countryside, you decide that England will be your next destination. The disease reached the island kingdom around 1497, and you're curious to see how this somewhat isolated nation has responded to the epidemic. In Rouen's busy port, you secure passage on a wool merchant's vessel bound for London, bidding farewell to Madame Beauchamp and the printer Guillaume, whose hospitality made the winter months both comfortable and enlightening. The Channel crossing is mercifully smooth. You've heard tales of terrible storms that can turn this narrow sea into a death trap for unwary sailors. Still, the small ship pitches and rolls enough to keep most passengers confined to the deck, faces tinged green with seasickness. You manage better than most, earning the respect of the English captain. First time I took this route was 30 years ago, Captain Thomas tells you as he shares a cup of ale, back when King Edward still sat on England's throne. Since then, I've seen 3 kings come and go, Edward, Richard, and Henry, and now young Henry VIII has just taken the crown. He shakes his head at the swift passage of time. The captain is a valuable source of information about how the epidemic reached England. We first heard rumours from French ports around 96, he recalls. By 97, cases appeared in London, Portsmouth, Bristol. Anywhere with active harbours, sailors brought it, as they bring all things good and ill from foreign shores, he continues. King Henry VII, God rest him, just passed 2 months ago. He was a cautious man, suspicious of foreigners even before the disease arrived. After it came, he tightened port restrictions, limited foreign merchants' movements. Some say it slowed the spread, others that it merely drove the afflicted into hiding, fearing deportation. As your ship enters the Thames estuary, the landscape unfolds, green marshes giving way to increasingly dense settlement as you approach the city. London announces itself with a forest of ship masts, then the imposing tower and the singular dome of St. Paul's Cathedral. Hundreds of small boats dart across the river like water insects, carrying people and goods between shores. You disembark at a bustling wharf, instantly surrounded by the clamour of commerce. Porters shouting offers to carry baggage, vendors selling hot pies and ale, customs officials examining cargo. The smell of the river mingles with wood smoke, roasting meat, brewery vapours, and the indefinable scent of thousands of humans living in close proximity. England feels both familiar and foreign after your time on the continent. The language shares roots with German but sounds entirely different. Architecture shows Norman influences but with distinctive English elements. Fashion seems a season or two behind Paris, with slight variations that mark it as uniquely English. Through Captain Thomas's recommendation, you find lodging at the Tabard Inn in Southwark, across the river from the city proper. This ancient establishment is known for hosting pilgrims travelling to Canterbury, immortalised in Chaucer's famous tales written a century earlier. The innkeeper, Master Baxter, is a third-generation host full of stories about famous guests and London's changing fortunes. My grandfather welcomed Chaucer himself, he boasts, though you suspect the timeline doesn't quite support this claim. And my father saw Jack Cade's rebellion come right past our door. Me, I've seen the sweating sickness take thousands, and now this French pox making its rounds. Master Baxter proves a valuable guide to London's response to the epidemic. The city's governance is complex. The Crown, the City Corporation, the parishes and the guilds all hold overlapping authority. This creates a patchwork approach to public health. Less centralised than Venice's systematic measures, but more organised than rural responses you've witnessed. The mayor ordered examinations of bathhouses and stews, Master Baxter explains, using the English term for brothels. Many were closed, especially here in Southwark, where the Bishop of Winchester licensed them for centuries. The city physicians advised against shared cups and bedding. Some parishes established special almshouses for their afflicted poor. You learn that London, unlike some continental cities, has no designated hospital for those with the French pox. Instead, existing institutions, St Bartholomew's, St Thomas's, and various parish infirmaries, have adapted to accommodate the growing number of cases. Treatment varies depending on a patient's means and connections. Over the coming days, you explore London's medical landscape. Through a letter of introduction from Guillaume the printer, you meet Dr. Thomas Lineker, one of England's most prominent physicians. Recently returned from Italy, where he studied at Padua, Lineker represents the new Renaissance learning taking root in England. Our medical knowledge lags behind Italy's, he admits as he shows you his impressive library. But we're advancing quickly. I've translated several Greek medical texts previously unavailable in England. King Henry VIII has shown interest in establishing a college of physicians to regulate practice and raise standards. Dr. Lineker's approach to the French pox reflects his humanist education. We must return to original Hippocratic principles, careful observation, detailed case histories, attention to environmental factors. The Arab commentators and medieval schoolmen obscured much of this wisdom. You inquire about specific treatments employed in England. Lineker sighs. Much the same as elsewhere. Mercury remains the primary recourse, though I advise more moderate application than most. Guaiacum from the Indies shows promise, especially for alleviating bone pains. Some colleagues report success with China root and sarsaparilla. More revealing is Lineker's candid assessment of mercury's limitations. I've documented numerous cases where the treatment causes worse symptoms than the disease: excessive salivation, tremors, loss of teeth, confusion. Yet patients demand it, believing stronger reactions indicate more effective medicine. It's difficult to persuade them otherwise. This tension between patient expectations and physician observations highlights the challenges of medical progress. Popular understanding lags behind emerging knowledge, with patients often preferring dramatic treatments with visible effects over gentler approaches, regardless of outcomes. Through your connection with Lineker, you gain access to St Bartholomew's Hospital, one of London's oldest charitable institutions. Founded in the 12th century, Bart's has evolved from a monastic infirmary to a substantial hospital serving London's poor. The dissolution of the monastery still lies in the future, so religious brothers and sisters continue to provide much of the nursing care. Brother Michael, who oversees a ward housing several pox victims, explains the hospital's approach. We separate them from others when possible, though space constraints often make this impossible. We provide clean bedding, nutritious food, basic wound care. For those who can tolerate it, mercury treatment is offered. Otherwise, we focus on comfort and spiritual consolation. The ward is sobering. A long room with beds lining both walls, each containing 1 or 2 patients in various stages of illness. The air carries the distinct odour of disease mingled with herbal remedies and the smoke from a central hearth. Attendants move between beds, changing dressings, offering drinks, emptying waste vessels. Brother Michael introduces you to several patients willing to share their stories. One, a former sailor named Will, contracted the disease in Calais 3 years earlier. Started with a single sore, no bigger than a penny, he tells you. Thought nothing of it when it healed. Then came the rash and fevers. Could no longer work the rigging with my joints so pained. Captain put me ashore here when I could no longer earn my keep. Will's condition has stabilised but left him permanently disabled, unable to return to his former profession. The hospital provides shelter and basic care, but his future remains uncertain. His story exemplifies the economic impact of the epidemic: lost livelihoods, increased dependency, strained charitable resources. Another patient, Margaret, represents a different path to infection. A domestic servant in a wealthy merchant's home, she married a man who had previously contracted the disease during military service in France. Unaware of his condition, she became infected and now suffers advanced symptoms, including destructive lesions on her face. My husband died last winter, she tells you softly. His family blames me for bewitching him, refuses to acknowledge me as his widow. My former employers dismissed me when the marks appeared. Without Bart's, I would be begging on the streets. Margaret's situation illustrates how the disease exacerbates existing social vulnerabilities, particularly for women. Limited economic opportunities, dependency on marriage for security, and the stigma of visible symptoms create cascading misfortunes from which few paths to recovery exist. Beyond the hospital, you explore how different social classes in London experience and respond to the epidemic. Through Lineker's connections, you glimpse the situation among the nobility and wealthy merchants. When afflicted, they receive treatment in the privacy of their homes, attended by physicians who maintain discretion. Mercury chambers, enclosed cabinets where patients sit exposed to mercury vapour, represent the most sophisticated treatment available, though not necessarily the most effective. London's substantial middle class, guild masters, successful merchants, lawyers and other professionals follow physicians' preventative advice more diligently than most. They modify behaviours, improve personal hygiene, avoid suspected transmission routes. When ill, they can afford moderate treatment without the extravagance of the nobility. The working poor, apprentices, journeymen, labourers, small shopkeepers, rely on barber surgeons and apothecaries for affordable care. Self-treatment with herbal remedies purchased from market vendors is common. Those with guild affiliations may receive support from these organisations when unable to work, providing a crucial safety net absent for many others. For the destitute, beggars, orphans, disabled, elderly without family support, only parish charity or institutions like Bart's offer hope of care. Many suffer and die in the streets or crowded tenements, their cases unrecorded, except in parish burial registers showing increased deaths from consumption or simply fever. Distinct from continental cities, London's response includes uniquely English elements reflecting its social and political structures. Parish vestries, local governing bodies overseeing church affairs and poor relief take primary responsibility for their afflicted residents rather than centralising care. Guilds provide support for members and their families, creating occupationally based safety nets. The City Corporation, London's municipal government, focuses on regulation and prevention rather than direct treatment. After several weeks in London, you venture into the English countryside, curious how rural communities are faring. You travel with a cloth merchant visiting wool producers in the Cotswolds, a region of rolling hills and prosperous market towns where sheep farming has created considerable wealth. The pastoral landscape appears idyllic, stone villages nestled in green valleys, fields divided by dry stone walls, sheep grazing on hillsides. Yet even here the epidemic has reached, though with less intensity than in densely populated London. In Cirencester, a substantial market town where your merchant companion has business, you meet the local barber surgeon, Master Simons. His practice serves the town and surrounding villages, providing everything from haircuts to tooth extractions, bloodletting to setting broken bones. Cases of the French pox are increasingly common among his patients. First appeared about 4 years ago, he tells you in his shop, where razors and surgical tools hang on the wall alongside dried herbs and alchemical equipment. A wool merchant returned from London with the telltale signs. Since then, I've treated perhaps 24 cases, mostly men who travelled to cities for business or pleasure. Master Simons's treatments reflect practical experience modified by limited access to exotic remedies. Mercury I use sparingly, too easy to poison the patient. I prefer a salve of my own devising for the sores containing comfrey and honey for the bone pains, willow bark decoction. When available, I incorporate guaiacum, but supplies are limited and costly here. His pragmatic approach, free from rigid adherence to medical theory, sometimes achieves better outcomes than more learned physicians' treatments. Several of his patients have maintained their livelihoods despite the disease, adapting when symptoms flare rather than succumbing to debilitating mercury poisoning. Through Master Simons, you meet local families affected by the epidemic. The Coopers, John, a wheelwright, his wife Anne, and their 3 surviving children, demonstrate the disease's impact on family structures. John contracted the pox in Oxford 2 years earlier and unwittingly infected Anne. Their youngest child, born after infection, shows signs of congenital transmission, curved leg bones and notched teeth. We manage as we can, Anne tells you as she continues her household tasks, despite visible discomfort. Neighbours help when John's hands pain him too much for fine work. The older children have learned to assist with tasks beyond their years. We pray for strength and endure. The Cooper family exemplifies the quiet suffering in countless households across Europe where the disease disrupts livelihoods, strains relationships, and alters children's futures. Unlike urban victims who might access institutional care, rural families largely cope through extended family networks and community support, continuing productive work whenever possible. In the village church, you notice a new fresco depicting St. Fiacre, traditionally associated with healing skin diseases. The priest, Father Thomas, explains that veneration of particular healing saints has increased since the epidemic began. People seek heavenly intercession when earthly remedies fail. St. Fiacre, St. Job, St. Roch all receive more prayers and offerings than before. The religious response in England remains firmly Catholic at this time. Henry VIII's break with Rome still lies decades in the future. Masses for the afflicted, processions imploring divine mercy, increased donations for church hospitals all form part of the spiritual campaign against the epidemic. Yet Father Thomas also acknowledges practical measures. I advise my parishioners on cleanliness and moderation in all things, he tells you. God's mercy works through natural means as well as miraculous ones. prudence in daily habits is not contrary to faith in divine healing. After your rural sojourn, you return to London as summer approaches. The city prepares for a momentous event, the coronation of the new king, Henry VIII, following his father's death in April. Despite the ongoing epidemic, a sense of optimism pervades the city. The young king, not yet 18, represents a new generation and fresh possibilities after his father's austere rule. The old king was careful with coin and foreign entanglements, observes Master Baxter at the Tabard. The new one seems more generous, more learning, more grand in his ambitions. Whether that bodes well or ill for England remains to be seen. You witness elaborate preparations for the coronation procession, buildings decorated with tapestries and banners, streets cleaned of refuse, temporary grandstands erected for spectators. For a brief time, the shadow of the epidemic recedes as London anticipates celebration. Yet even amid festivities, the disease remains present, in bandaged limbs among the crowd, in absent faces too ill to attend, in whispered concerns about contagion in large gatherings. As June 1502 approaches, you prepare for the next stage of your journey. After observing the epidemic's impact in Italy, Germany, France, and England, you decide to continue to the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, the launching points for Columbus's voyages, and the source of many theories about the disease's origins. Before departing, you visit Dr. Lineker one final time. He's been collating observations from physicians across England, creating what would now be recognised as epidemiological data. His parchments show maps marking outbreaks, tables of symptoms and progression, notes on treatment outcomes. Knowledge accumulates slowly, he tells you, but it does accumulate. Each careful observation, properly recorded and shared, builds our understanding. Perhaps not in my lifetime, but eventually this disease will yield its secrets to rational inquiry. His words capture the emerging scientific worldview, empirical, methodical, patient, that will eventually transform medicine from an art based on ancient authorities to a science grounded in verifiable evidence. The French pox, challenging traditional medical frameworks, accelerates this transition despite the suffering it causes. As you book passage on a merchant vessel bound for Lisbon, you reflect on all you've witnessed in England. Like everywhere, the epidemic crosses social boundaries, while responses reinforce them. Like everywhere, existing institutions adapt rather than transform. Like everywhere, individuals show remarkable resilience amid suffering. Yet England's island nature and distinct social structures have shaped unique aspects of its response. The parish-based approach to care, the early development of systematic record-keeping under physicians like Lineker, the practical adaptation of barber surgeons like Master Simons. These differences, subtle but significant, remind you that no epidemic manifests identically across cultures. Local conditions, resources, and traditions always influence both impact and response. As your ship prepares to sail with the tide, you stand at the rail watching London recede. 7 years have passed since the first major outbreak in Naples, and still the disease maintains its grip on Europe. Yet life continues, commerce flows, knowledge advances, communities support their vulnerable members, individuals adapt to changed circumstances. The epidemic has become woven into the fabric of European society, no longer a shocking novelty but an established feature of the landscape. How it will continue to shape that landscape, medically, socially, intellectually, in coming decades remains to be seen. Your journey to the Iberian Peninsula promises new insights into this ongoing transformation. The journey from London to Lisbon takes nearly 2 weeks, a relatively swift passage blessed by favourable winds and calm seas. Your vessel is a Portuguese carrack, a sturdy ocean-going ship of the type that carried explorers around Africa to India and across the Atlantic to the New World. The crew is experienced, having made this voyage many times, and they regale passengers with tales of distant lands and strange peoples. The captain, Duarte Pacheco, has sailed with some of Portugal's greatest explorers. "I was with Bartolomeu Dias when we rounded the Cape of Good Hope," he tells you proudly, "and I've spoken with men who accompanied Vasco da Gama to India. The world is opening before us, revealing wonders beyond imagination." You inquire whether he knew Columbus or any who sailed with him. The captain's expression sours slightly. "Columbus sought Portuguese patronage first, before turning to Spain. Our king rejected his proposal, wisely, I think, as his calculations of Earth's circumference were wildly mistaken. He found land where he expected India, but it was mere fortune that prevented his expedition's failure." This Portuguese perspective on Columbus, somewhat dismissive, emphasizing his errors while acknowledging his luck, contrasts with the reverential treatment he often receives in Spain and Italy. It reminds you how history appears differently depending on who tells the story. As your ship approaches the Iberian coast, the landscape transforms from the green fields of northern Europe to the more arid golden hills of the south. The light is different here, clearer, more intense, casting sharper shadows. The air carries unfamiliar scents, unfamiliar herbs, different cooking spices, the distinctive fragrance of cork oak and olive groves. Lisbon reveals itself dramatically as your ship enters the Tagus estuary, a city of white buildings climbing hills above the sparkling river, crowned by the imposing Castelo de São Jorge. The harbour buzzes with unprecedented activity as ships arrive from and depart for Portuguese outposts in Africa, India and Brazil, carrying spices, gold, exotic woods and other treasures that have made Portugal suddenly wealthy and powerful. As you disembark, the vibrant multinational character of Lisbon becomes immediately apparent. Portuguese sailors mingle with African labourers, Jewish merchants. Despite official expulsion, many remain by converting, at least outwardly, Moorish craftsmen and visitors from throughout Europe and beyond. The streets ring with multiple languages, and market stalls display goods from 4 continents. You find lodging in the Alfama district, the oldest part of the city, where narrow, winding streets climb the hillside. Your host, Senora Cardoso, is a widow who supports herself by renting rooms to respectable travellers. Her late husband was a carpenter who worked on ships for the East India trade, and their modest home contains curiosities he brought back. Carved ivory from Africa, patterned textiles from India, exotic shells from distant shores. Senora Cardoso proves an invaluable guide to Lisbon's experience with the French disease, which Portuguese physicians were among the first to connect with Columbus's voyages. It appeared here around 1496, she tells you, first among sailors and those who frequented the waterfront taverns and brothels. Many blamed it on our African and Indian ventures, but soon the connection to the Spanish discoveries across the Atlantic became widely accepted. The Portuguese response to the epidemic has been influenced by the nation's trading empire and historical circumstances. As a seafaring power with colonial outposts, Portugal has greater exposure to diverse diseases but also access to potential remedies from around the world. The Reconquista, the centuries-long Christian reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula from Islamic rule, only concluded in 1492, leaving behind a multicultural medical tradition incorporating European, Islamic and Jewish knowledge. Through Senora Cardoso's connections, you meet Dr. João Rodrigues, a physician trained at the University of Coimbra, who has treated numerous cases of the disease among Lisbon's elite. He receives you in his consulting room, where shelves hold jars of medicinal substances from around the Portuguese Empire, herbs from Brazil, minerals from Africa, botanical preparations from India. What makes Portuguese medicine distinct is our global perspective, he explains. While physicians in Paris or London rely primarily on European and Mediterranean pharmacopoeia, we incorporate remedies from Africa, India, and now the Americas. This broader arsenal offers more options for treating novel diseases. Dr. Rodrigues describes Portugal's early adoption of guaiacum wood from the New World as a treatment. Our ships began bringing it directly from Brazil around 1498, earlier than most European nations received it. This gave us considerable experience with its effects. It seems to provide relief for many patients, particularly for the bone pains and skin lesions, though it rarely affects a complete cure. More interesting is his integration of traditional remedies from Africa and India into treatment protocols. From our West African territories, we've obtained herbs that indigenous healers use for similar symptoms. From India, compounds based on herbs like turmeric and neem show promise in reducing inflammation. We don't fully understand how these work, but careful observation confirms beneficial effects in many cases. This pragmatic, globally informed approach represents the cutting edge of Renaissance medicine, willing to experiment with diverse traditions while beginning to apply systematic observation to evaluate outcomes. The Portuguese maritime empire, bringing together medical knowledge from 4 continents, creates unique conditions for such innovation. You inquire about the disease's prevalence and perception in Portugal. Dr. Rodriguez sighs. It remains widespread, affecting all social classes. Initially, there was much stigma and blaming of foreigners, Africans, Jews, Spanish sailors. But as respected figures, even members of noble families, developed symptoms, public discourse became more measured. He continues, our proximity to Spain, where the connection to Columbus's voyages was first proposed, meant this explanation gained early acceptance here. Whether accurate or not, it shifted blame to distant shores rather than local scapegoats, which perhaps reduced some social strife. During your time in Lisbon, you observe both similarities and differences in how various social groups experience the epidemic compared to other European nations. The nobility and wealthy merchants, as elsewhere, receive private treatment and can afford expensive imported remedies. What's distinctive is their early access to New World treatments like guaiacum and sarsaparilla through Portugal's direct trading connections. The urban middle classes, guild members, government officials, prosperous shopkeepers follow medical advice similar to their counterparts in Northern Europe. Moderate living, improved hygiene, cautious intimacy. Their treatment options include both traditional European remedies and more affordable versions of exotic imports. For the working poor and sailors, Lisbon offers several hospitals founded during the previous century's plague epidemics, now adapted to treat the new disease. The largest All Saints Royal Hospital, established by King Joan II in 1492, has wards specifically for those with the French disease. Treatment focuses on basic care, dietary management, and affordable herbal remedies rather than expensive mercury or imported substances. Most distinctive is Lisbon's substantial population of African slaves and free black residents brought from Portuguese colonies in West Africa, Congo, and Angola. Their experience of the epidemic reveals the intersection of disease with racial hierarchy and colonialism. When afflicted, enslaved individuals receive only basic treatment determined by their economic value to owners rather than medical need. Free black residents face discrimination at hospitals and from practitioners despite officially equal access to care. After 2 weeks in Lisbon, you decide to continue to Seville, the heart of Spain's American enterprise and the city most directly connected to Columbus and his voyages. The overland journey takes you through Portugal's eastern provinces and into the Spanish region of Andalusia, a landscape of olive groves, vineyards, and fortified hill towns bearing witness to centuries of frontier warfare between Christian and Islamic states. You travel with a merchant caravan, the safest option for crossing this sometimes lawless borderland. Your companions include Portuguese traders carrying Asian spices to Spanish markets, an Italian diplomat bound for the Spanish court, and several academics travelling to Seville's prestigious university. Around evening fires, conversation inevitably turns to the great transformations of the age, geographical discoveries, religious tensions, and the mysterious disease that has shadowed these developments. Columbus opened a new world to us, argues a young Spanish scholar, but perhaps unleashed forces we scarcely comprehend. New lands, new peoples, new wealth, and new afflictions. God's design in this remains obscure. The timing alone establishes the connection, adds a physician from Coimbra. The disease appeared in Barcelona within months of Columbus's return. His sailors visited brothels upon landing, and soon the first cases emerged precisely in those districts. The Italian diplomat offers a different perspective, yet excavations in my country have uncovered skeletons showing signs of the disease from well before Columbus sailed. Perhaps it existed in both worlds, and only now has found conditions to flourish. These debates, heated yet informed by growing empirical evidence, exemplify the intellectual ferment of the early 16th century. Traditional authorities and explanations face challenges from new observations and experiences. The epidemic itself, defying classical medical categories, accelerates this questioning of inherited knowledge. You reach Seville as summer heat intensifies, the mighty Guadalquivir River providing welcome relief for the city. Seville in 1502 stands at the centre of Spain's American enterprise. All ships to and from the newly claimed territories must pass through its port, and the Casa de Contratación, House of Trade, established here that very year administers the emerging colonial system. The city hums with activity related to the American ventures. Shipyards construct vessels for Atlantic crossings. Warehouses store goods bound for colonies and treasures returned from them. Officials process documentation for passengers and cargo. Adventurers seek backers for expeditions. Indigenous people brought back by explorers often forcibly draw curious crowds. Through a letter of introduction provided by Dr. Rodriguez in Lisbon, you gain access to Dr. Francisco López de Villalobos, physician to the Spanish royal court and author of the first detailed medical treatise on the disease published in Spain. You meet him at the university, where he occasionally lectures despite his primary duties to the monarchy. I titled my work On the Contagious and Accursed Disease of the French, he tells you with a wry smile, following the custom of naming it after one's traditional enemies, but I believe we Spaniards must accept some responsibility for its presence in Europe, if indeed it came from Hispaniola with Columbus's men. Dr. Villalobos represents the finest medical thinking of Renaissance Spain, combining traditional Galenic training with humanist learning and practical observation. His treatise, published in 1498, provided the first comprehensive clinical description of the disease in Spanish, including detailed observations of its progression through distinct stages. What distinguishes this malady from those previously known, he explains, is its pattern of remission and recurrence. The initial symptoms resolve without treatment, giving false hope of recovery. Then new and different manifestations appear weeks or months later. This pattern confounded our understanding until we began recording detailed case histories over extended periods. You inquire about treatments employed in Spain, where proximity to the source of guaiacum might provide advantages. Dr. Villalobos sighs. Guaiacum has indeed been our primary recourse, especially after mercury showed such dangerous effects. But while it alleviates symptoms for many patients, few experience complete recovery. Some physicians now combine approaches, moderate mercury treatments alternating with guaiacum decoctions and dietary regimens. Most valuable is his perspective on Columbus's role in the epidemic. I have interviewed several physicians who treated Columbus's crew upon their return. They confirm that some sailors developed symptoms consistent with the disease shortly after reaching Spain. Whether they contracted it in the Indies or carried it there from Spain remains debated. He continues, Columbus himself suffered from a painful progressive illness in his later years that some believe was the French disease, though others attribute it to gout or arthritis. He died 4 years ago, his great discovery having brought him more grief than glory in the end. During your time in Seville, you gain access to documents and persons connected directly to Columbus's voyages. At the Casa de Contratación, newly established archives contain logs, correspondence, and official reports from the earliest expeditions. Though carefully guarded as state secrets, your connections with Dr. Villalobos allow limited access to these materials. The logs mention health problems among crew members during and after the voyages, though descriptions are often vague. More revealing are personal letters from participants seeking medical care after their return, describing symptoms clearly recognizable as the French disease. Whether they contracted it in the Americas or after returning to Spain's port cities remains unclear from these accounts. You also meet Rodrigo de Jerez, an elderly man who claims to have sailed on Columbus's first voyage. Now living in modest circumstances despite his historic role, he receives visitors occasionally to share his experiences for a few coins. Whether his tales are entirely truthful or embellished for effect, they provide a first-hand perspective on the expedition's aftermath. Many of my shipmates fell ill in the months after our return, he tells you, sipping wine his fee has purchased. Some with fevers that passed quickly, others with persistent ailments, including the dreaded pox. I was fortunate to escape the worst, though aches visit my bones when weather changes. He describes primitive medical practices observed among indigenous Caribbean peoples, some of which were adopted by desperate European settlers. They used the bark and leaves of certain trees to make infusions for skin ailments. Some colonists found these more effective than our own remedies. Eventually, these treatments found their way back to Spain as the guayacum wood, now sold at such high prices. As summer passes into autumn, you extend your stay in Spain, travelling to other cities including Salamanca with its famed university and Barcelona, where Columbus was received by Ferdinand and Isabella upon his return. Throughout these journeys you observe how the epidemic has become integrated into Spanish society, no longer a terrifying novelty but an established feature of the medical and social landscape. By 1502, 7 years after the first major European outbreak, the disease has transformed from acute epidemic to chronic endemic presence. The initial panic has subsided, replaced by systematic adaptation. Medical protocols, though still largely ineffective, have become standardized. Social responses, from hospital wards to preventive regulations, have been institutionalized. Religious interpretations have evolved from seeing the disease as unprecedented divine punishment to incorporating it into existing frameworks of sin and redemption. As winter approaches, you prepare for your return journey, having travelled through much of Western Europe, observing the epidemic's impact and evolving responses. Your experiences in the Iberian Peninsula have provided crucial perspective on the disease's possible origins and earliest European manifestations, complementing observations from Italy, Germany, France, and England. Before departing, you visit the magnificent Seville Cathedral, where Columbus's son Diego will eventually be entombed, though Columbus himself will be buried in Valladolid, then moved multiple times in death as in life. The massive structure, still under construction after replacing a mosque demolished following the Christian reconquest, symbolizes the transformative era you've witnessed, a world simultaneously expanding through exploration and contracting through shared afflictions. The journey home gives you time to reflect on all you've observed about how societies respond to epidemic disease. Certain patterns have emerged consistently across diverse cultures and systems. Initially, communities react with fear, seeking to identify causes and assign blame, usually to marginalized groups or external enemies. This scapegoating provides psychological comfort but hinders effective response. As understanding grows, practical adaptations develop. Modified social behaviors, public health measures, treatment protocols. These evolve through trial and error, gradually improving outcomes even without theoretical understanding of disease mechanisms. Social hierarchies shape both vulnerability to disease and access to care. The privileged suffer less, not from biological immunity, but from superior resources, conditions, and treatment options. The vulnerable suffer disproportionately, their afflictions often less visible in historical records. Religious and moral frameworks initially interpret new diseases as divine punishment, often for sexual transgressions. Over time, these harsh judgments typically soften as respected community members are affected and practical care becomes more organized. Medical understanding advances through empirical observation, challenging traditional authorities. Epidemic diseases that defy classical explanations accelerate this process, pushing practitioners toward evidence-based approaches. Throughout, human resilience manifests in countless adaptations. Communities supporting afflicted members, practitioners developing new treatments, individuals modifying behaviors to reduce risk while maintaining necessary activities. As your ship sails homeward with the changing seasons, you ponder how these patterns might repeat with future epidemics. Perhaps centuries hence, new diseases will emerge to challenge human understanding and institutions. Will societies respond with greater wisdom, having learned from experiences like the French disease? Or will they repeat cycles of fear, blame, and stumbling adaptation before finding effective responses? You know now that the disease, labelled variously as French, Neapolitan, Spanish, or simply the Great Pox, will continue its devastating course for centuries to come. Not until 1905 will the causative organism Treponema pallidum be identified. Not until the 1940s will effective antibiotic treatment become available. Countless lives will be affected in the intervening centuries. Some ended prematurely, others lived in suffering, still others shaped by caring for the afflicted or developing treatments. The debate over the disease's origins will continue as well. Archaeological evidence from both Europe and the Americas complicates the Columbus connection, suggesting more complex patterns of development and transmission than simple importation from one continent to another. The mutation of related treponemal diseases from non-venereal to venereal forms may have occurred independently in multiple locations as social conditions changed. What remains clear from both historical accounts and modern understanding is how profoundly epidemic diseases shape human societies, not just through direct suffering and death, but through transformed social relations, institutional responses, medical developments, and cultural expressions. The French disease permanently altered European perspectives on sexuality, approaches to public health, development of hospitals, and countless other social dimensions. As your journey concludes, you carry this deeper understanding of how humans and diseases co-evolve, each shaping the other through complex interactions. The syphilis epidemic of Renaissance Europe, for all its suffering, contributed to medical advances, institutional development, and social adaptations that would eventually reduce its impact. This pattern, crisis-driving innovation, suffering-spurring response, offers perhaps the most hopeful perspective on humanity's ongoing struggle with infectious disease. The story of any epidemic is ultimately the story of human vulnerability and resilience, our bodies susceptible to invisible organisms, our societies capable of remarkable adaptation. From the French disease of 1495 to modern outbreaks, this fundamental dynamic remains constant. We are simultaneously fragile biological beings and creators of knowledge and institutions that expand our collective capacity to survive and thrive despite that fragility. This tension between human vulnerability and human ingenuity continues to define our relationship with disease. As we face new epidemics, we draw on accumulated knowledge and institutional memory from past crises, yet often repeat historical patterns of initial denial, scapegoating, and unequal impact before developing effective responses. Understanding this history doesn't prevent all future suffering, but it does illuminate paths toward more rapid and equitable adaptation. And so, as you finally return home, changed by all you've witnessed across epidemic-stricken Europe, you carry both sobering knowledge of human suffering and inspiring examples of human resilience. The French disease, like all great epidemics, reveals both the worst and best of humanity. Our capacity for fear, blame, and cruelty, alongside our capacity for care, adaptation, and healing. This complex legacy continues to shape our world today, visible to those who know where to look for its lingering influences.